So I believe where we left off is we were talking about Sigmund Freud, as he was kind of one of the first individuals to give us kind of a formalized theory of not only a personality but of the mind and but specifically at least child development. And as we saw that his theory and his development is based on the satisfaction or in control of those two basic drives that we talked about in the unconscious that dealt with sex and aggression, or we could say life and the death instinct, if we want to use those terms. And we talked about the oral phase, and again, um, each of these stages is an area where the individual is trying to get some type of gratification or sensual feeling. And so the oral phase, because that's an area where, biologically we need to get sustenance. That's the first area of sensual pleasure we get, and then we move on as we grow. Okay. And so the second stage is, when I think about the rewards we give out, like, right? So we have kindergarten graduation, elementary school graduation, high school graduation, um, college graduation, marriage, all of these things that we celebrate. And I always have thought about this because I really feel like the first kind of celebration we should have, or the first reward we should have, is potty training. And this may sound silly, but I want you to think about this from a growth perspective. When we are going through the potty training process, it's going to be the first time in our life that we're going to give into the demands of an authority figure. They're going to say, you can't do that. And eventually we're going to comply to that authority figure, parent or caregiver or whoever that may be. Now, that's one part. That's the social aspect of it. But the second aspect is it's going to be the first time that we biologically we take control over a biological system. So instead of just defecating or urinating, we say, no, this isn't the proper place or the proper time. And so we hold that and then do it at the correct time. So not only are we learning about our social world and authority and those kinds of things, we're also taking control of biological processes. So, and this is why Freud thought that the anal phase, which goes from approximately 2 to 4 years of age, is an important one because that's where the sensual aspect is as we take control of it. Now, what he argued is if you don't get through the anal phase, let's say you have difficulty learning to potty train and those kinds of things and take control of your biological processes, instead of, because you can't take control of your inner world, your inner biological world, you take control of your external world. So this is someone, if you've ever called someone anal, okay, or anal retentive, or that person is really anal about getting things exactly right. This is where that term came from. Um, and the idea is that someone who is anal is someone who controls their environment to an extent. Obsessive compulsive disorder could be explained by being deficit in this anal stage of development. A person at work who their desk is always perfect, and when there's a meeting, they start the meeting right on time, end the meeting right on time, and the like. So this is kind of the anal stage of development. Okay. So moving on, because I really kind of want to get through these and not spend too much time on them, but the next phase is it's not uncommon, and I want to be careful with this this stage. Okay. is it's not abnormal for you to go into your kid's bathtub and stuff, and they'll be rubbing themselves. Um, Now, the reason why I want to be careful with this, and this is why it's called the phallic stage, is that there's a difference between childhood masturbation and adult masturbation. For a child, when they touch themselves because there's millions of nerve cells that send pleasure signals up to the brain, meaning that it feels good. Okay. Now, adult masturbation also includes the idea of fantasization about wanting to have that experience with someone else. Okay. And this is a good kind of checkbox. If you find your child this and you ask, why are you doing that? If they mention, well, I was thinking about that should send up red flags. You should instantly have red flags about that situation because that child was taught about fantasization and sexuality. So that's something as parents I'd have you keep in mind. Now, in more modern times and stuff, is this limited to the age of 4 to 6? No, it's not. We've actually, with the advent of the ultrasounds and the quality of ultrasounds we have today, we have observed children masturbating in the womb of their mothers. So and even through infancy and 2 to 4 years old. So one of the things that Freud would need to update on this is this phallic phase isn't just limited to the age of 4 to 6. Now, there's a couple reasons why as adults we need to address this. And it's important why this is in early childhood as well, is from a statistical perspective. The younger the age that the parent talks about sexuality and intimacy, the later the age the child will actually enter into sexual relationships and sexual activity. Okay. So there's an inverse relationship. The later we teach our kids about sexuality, the younger they will enter into sexual activity. Okay. And so this is an important thing from at least if you one of those parents who want their child to wait until they're older or into adulthood to have sex, then start talking to them in early childhood. Don't wait until they're going through puberty or something like that. So there's that line of research as well that kind of shows that maybe there is something to do with this phase. Now, there's a lot of controversy about this period, and this is kind of where a lot of jokes are made about Freud, about wanting to fall in love with your mother, all those kinds of things. Because during this phase, he came up with what's called the Oedipus complex, and Oedipus, just to kind of give you a note on him, is he's a Greek myth. He was a fictitious person in Greek time to tell a story, and there was this prophecy that when he was born, that when he became an adult, he would kill his father and have relationships with his mother. And because they were so scared of this prophecy coming true, they sent Oedipus to a city far away. And he was raised by basically adoptive parents, but he didn't know they were adoptive. He thought that they were his actual parents. And so, as the story goes, he heard of this prophecy and he got scared. And so he left what he thought was his parents back to the city he was born in. And sure enough, he fell in love with his mom and killed his dad. Okay. But he didn't know that that was his mother and actual biological father. So it's kind of interesting because if there's anyone who probably shouldn't be tied to the Oedipus complex, it was Oedipus, because he did everything he could not for this to happen. So it's just kind of an interesting story. But what is this complex kind of outside of that Greek story? The idea is that as a young boy, you look at the person who loves you and provides you with affection, and you want that, and you desire that affection. Okay. And who is the person who is in your way of getting mom's affection? That's of course the father. Okay, the father is kind of that person that is kind of in between mom and me. So what does the young boy do? Well, he starts to mimic his father's behaviors to gain the affection of the mother, the same way that dad has. Okay. Later on, Carl Jung is going to add the Electra complex, which is just basically, and I won't get into this, it's basically the same as Oedipus complex, where the girl seeks the affection of the father, and so she mimics the mother's behaviors for that affection. It gets a little bit weirder with that one, but I don't think that's a necessary conversation. You can read it in the textbook if you'd like. So what is the point of this? If we strip away the sexuality part of this in Freud's theory, there is some notion about this idea, and please follow my train of thought with this. We do know that between the age of 4 to 6, and we could actually argue 2 to 6, there is a very, very important type of play children engage in. Okay. And it's called imitative play. Okay, it's where you watch Superman, so you go put on a cape and spandex and you go fly around. It's where you see a fireman, so you play with fire trucks. It's where you see nurses and doctors, and you go and try these things on. And this is if this is why this is important. We have found that the more play children do, the stronger identity they have, and they actually do better in school. They do better cognitively, they do better socially. All of those areas that we look at school for children's growth and development, the more play during this age, the better well off they are. In fact, when we look at what predicts the majority of people to go to college, and it's we look at the what a 5-year-old's view of school is. If they have a positive view, that increases the probability that they'll go to college. Okay, so this is a very important period of time in development. And since we've been, we look at divorces and the ability to divorce since it became it became easier coming into the 1960s, 1970s. So we've had a few generations of individuals who have been raised in more single homes, and in fact today there's a good percentage. We'll get into it later. There's a good percentage of kids that are raised just in single parent homes without the divorce and all those kinds of things. So, but we have had plenty of those, and what we have found, and I want to make this clear: this is not a criticism about single parents. There's many single parents that are amazing. They do a wonderful job and are incredible for what they accomplish with work and taking care of kids and school, all those things. I admire single parents a lot. But what we have found is let's take a mother who has a son. Okay. If that mother, because maybe she had bad relationships experience, does not expose that son to some type of male role model, whether it be a grandpa, uncle, boyfriend, stepfather, or something of that like, that boy tends to grow up and has difficulties in intimate relationships. Okay. And conversely, if we have a dad who is raising a young girl and he doesn't provide positive role models such as an aunt, a grandma, a girlfriend, or a stepmother, that girl also grows up to um, have difficulties in intimate relationships. And why? Because remember, when children are at this age, they're doing that imitative play. And so they're watching those two adults interact. And that's where children are learning how to interact with the opposite sex, especially during this period between the age of 4 and 6. Okay. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind once we strip away Freud's sexual aspect of this time period. Okay. All right. One of the unfortunate things that I think of in Freud's theory that he did is he said from basically 6 to puberty is a latent period, meaning that nothing really kind of happens significantly. Check these off. Nothing significantly happens during this period of time. We learn skills, learn how to write and read, skills basically. But this had an unfortunate consequence because you'll notice that I mentioned at the beginning of class that child development is probably the most well-studied area of human development because of the idea that 18 was it. But because Freud said nothing happened during this period, most theorists and whatnot, if there's an area of research we have the least amount of data and information on, it's this elementary school years. In fact, much of our knowledge about this age period comes from teacher observations and research that goes on in schools. So if you are interested in researching child development or becoming a child development psychologist, this is a pretty good area to go into because there's not much known about this age group. All right. The next stage goes from puberty on, or puberty, we should say, on to, the age of 18, according to this theory, is we call this the genital period. And this is where, and I'll basically kind of bring this out, this is where it goes from the child version to the adult version of masturbation, where there tends now is this idea of relationships. There's this idea of being involved with someone. And what Freud recommended, what Freud stated, is individuals who don't learn how to control their desires during this period tend to be people who are raised to be high risk takers or need instant gratification all the time and those kinds of things, is because this is a period where you have to learn self-control to get through. Okay. All right. With that being said, that completes Freud's theory and his developmental stages. And as you can see, there's some, if you want to put it this way, strangeness. But there are areas in here where we can actually find some data or some parts that are good. The criticism of Freud's theory, though, and the issues that a lot of, especially research psychologists have, is that his model is not testable. How do you test the oral phase? How do you test the idea of an id and an ego because everything that Freud's theory is it's very circular, right? So why did I do that? Well, it was because of those unconscious drives. Well, what are those unconscious drives? They're the product of your behavior. So there's just no way to test his theory. But this is kind of where we are with his, and there are some neo-Freudians who are going to de-emphasize human sexuality and emphasize other areas of life, such as control and relationships and those kinds of things. But as a beginning idea of this is a good place to end with Sigmund Freud. So Freud's theory, if we go back to our three circles, is what you would consider kind of a biological theory, dealing with biological drives, human sexuality, the aggression drive, and those kinds of things. dealing with evolutionary concepts and the like. The next theory that I want to introduce is now the cognitive theory, the thought process. How do our thoughts evolve over the lifespan? And probably the most well-known cognitive theory is Jean Piaget. Um, Now, Jean Piaget, and I always forget to include this. There's something important that I keep forgetting to put into this slide, so I'm going to do it right now. Okay. All right. Piaget was actually when he started was an ethologist, and what that is people who study kind of the development and evolution of animals. In fact, one of his famous mentors worked on the imprinting of geese and ducks. And the story goes as Piaget would be walking with his mentor, and there would be these ducks or geese following them around the campus. Um, because what they would do is once that uh, goose or duck was born or duckling was born, they Piaget's mentor would be the first thing that the duckling would say. Let's use ducks. Duckling would see, so the duckling would assume that Piaget's mentor was its parent, and so they'd start walking around and following him. And this kind of started Piaget's thought process, and then he went from that to becoming a psychologist, is he wanted to know, well, how do humans develop? He saw this, right from the beginning with geese and ducks. They imprint on a parent and then they just start mimicking the parent, and and that's basically it. That's their evolution. But he noticed that with humans, that is our development is much slower than that. That it doesn't we don't instantly come out and start following mom around the house and start to, making complex statements like 5 times 100 is 500 or whatever it may be. We don't have that already equipped. And so he was very curious about um, um, how children develop. And there's a few things that I want to start with is just some definitions. Okay. One of the things that Piaget felt is that stress is an important aspect of child development. Okay. And what he really argued is that the job of the parent is to allow children to make mistakes, basically, in a safe, confined way. So the point of parenting is to allow your child to explore, to exist in the world, and to make mistakes and feel stress, because it's in those stress situations that we learn and we develop. Okay. And so this is the first aspect of Piaget's theory. And he believed that this is how we construct and we adapt to our environment. Okay. And then he had two terms, and these two terms, the way these work is going to end up developing our schema for the world or for objects and things. So let me take you through this process of assimilation and accommodation. Okay. A simulation is, let's say, a child who is suckling and whatnot, and mom puts a bottle while the little infant is suckling, and he realizes, he can get juice or milk out of by suckling on the bottle. Okay, this is what we call a simulation. There's this new object, and we've learned what its purpose is. Okay, so the little guy is developing and growing, and then we introduce a cup. Okay. And if you've ever seen a little infant with a cup, they don't instantly just put it up to their mouth and start drinking. No, they hang it on the table, and then maybe they'll use it as a drum, and then they'll, play with it and whatnot. And then one day mom puts a little juice in it, and, a lot of the first time they might swidge the juice or throw it or whatnot. But eventually they start kind of seeing, mom and dad or brother and sister, that they notice that they're doing something different with the cup. They're putting that up to their mouth and they're drinking it, but that's what my bottle was for as well. And so now I have two objects that have the same purpose, but they're different. Okay. But because they're different, because they require a different method, we got to accommodate, we got to create a new category basically for a cup versus a bottle. Okay. And this is the process of accommodation. Okay. Now, what these result in is what we call a schema. And I think the best way to describe a schema is the representation of a dog. Okay. There's small dogs, there are large dogs, there's dogs of different colors, there's barky dogs, there's quiet dogs. But for some reason, when we look at a dog, we recognize it as a dog. Okay. Because there are features with dogs that are very similar. They have tails, they have the ears, the snout, the teeth, their joints and how they walk are all the same and whatnot. And so we have this basic kind of representation of dogness so that when we go look at a dog, we recognize it as a dog. And schemas are those things. They're those basic representations of what an object is. Okay. Now, you can probably guess on a little higher level, it is our schemas that develop our stereotypes and our prejudices. And yes, that they do kind of are the building blocks for those negative those negative aspects of human existence. But schemas are also very useful because I want you to imagine walking into a room of 100 people. And if you didn't have a schema for a man and woman, that's our first division usually, man, woman, then we basically have to deal with all 100. But once we can split them at least into the two genders, we have this basic idea of who I'm with and who I'm not with. Okay, on that first basics. And then we use other things such as, the dress of a ski. And what we're doing is we're trying to make it go to the group of people we feel safe with and figure out the group that maybe we should avoid using our schema. Okay. And it's a very effective method, when we drive and all those kinds of things to navigate the world in a more efficient way. Okay. So on the other end of the spectrum, schemas help us and guide us through our world. And in that end, it's been pretty successful given the length of time humans have been here, even though it's a relatively evolutionary short period. Okay. So now, probably the difference between Piaget and Freud's theory, and this one is going to have its criticisms as well, is that he did develop kind of tests to see the difference between his developmental stages. So we're going to implement the idea of research and testing models with his cognitive model. And he came up with what's known as a 4-stage cognitive model. Again, just like Freud, there's stages of development. Okay. And so let's go through these and let's kind of rehearse these. What's the first stage? 0 to birth, right? I mean, 0 to birth. That doesn't make sense. Birth to 2 years of age, or roughly 2 years of age. Um, so during this period, one of the things we have to recognize is when we're under the age of 2, we're pretty much pretty helpless. We're just trying to figure out this world around us and how to deal with this sensory input and how to respond to sensory stimuli in the environment. So let me give you a kind of example. So, we have again, we'll use the example of a bottle. And so there's a bottle sitting out there in space. Okay. And the sensory motor phase is about having the infant learn that they can reach out, grab that bottle, and put it to their mouth. That sensory motor coordination. that is necessary for us to navigate our social world. So between, 0 and 2, we, start with, crawling and then walking. We start with, being able to grab a bottle and put it to our mouth and those kinds of things. We start to learn how to use sound to get what we want and those kinds of things. So this is the what Piaget felt was the first stage of cognitive development, is just being able to explore our physical world. And so what is necessary to go on to the next phase of world? Well, we have to be able to hold that information in our brain and represent it in some way. We have to symbolically have a cognitive thought about it. And what does that take? It it takes us to the ability to know an object exists even when it's not in our sensory experience. So probably the test that Piaget used is he had this kind of wall, this little tiny wall, and he has the infant on one side, and the infant can see Piaget or mom or whoever's doing it, and they put his favorite teddy bear right in front of the little guy. And of course, the infant interacts with it. If it's verbal, it's saying, Teddy, 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 those kinds of things. And what Piaget does in front of the infant is then takes the teddy bear and puts it behind the wall. And then they do this kind of, where's the teddy bear? Where's Teddy? Where's Teddy? Or, if they're nonverbal, they're doing this action, where did it go? And what Piaget found is infants under about 24 months were like, I don't know, but around 24 months or above, they would kind of look at Piaget or mom like they're being ridiculous, and they'll just kind of go peek over the wall and said, "You put it right here, dummy," kind of thing. And what Piaget recognized is that this represents what we call object permanence, the ability to hold information in our mind without it being sensory placed in the mind. Now, further research shows that children go through object permanence at a younger age, but if you want to mess with a 6-month-old or your 6-month-old, take them to a babysitter, have the babysitter have clothes that the infant has never worn, and when you take him there, put the little guy in those clothes. Don't leave him with any blankets or toys that he has. Just give him to the caregiver and leave. And you'll find that that babysitter will never babysit for you again, because the infant can't smell you, can't feel you, can't see you. Smell is usually the big one for infants when their parents aren't there, and that infant is going to scream to the ends of the world. They'll probably hear him at the end of the block. But on the other side is if you have an infant under the age of 6 months and you leave them with a babysitter, make sure they have something that has your scent on it. But so just if you want to be mean to a baby or a babysitter. All right. So, but we'll stick with the original model with Piaget's model. So we're able to hold information in our brain. So he believes we go from sensory motor to what's called pre-operational um, um, period. And again, I want you to think about this is about symbolic thought, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the class. If we want to think about this as a symbolic development, somewhere between the age of about 0 to 6, the average child will learn up to 60,000 words. Okay. I think about that. That's 60,000 symbols. that a little infant or a little child is representing in their mind. Okay. And then this creates some issues for the little child. Is one, they're unable to think about those symbolic items being irreversible. So many children, when they break their car, the car's broken. It can't be put back together. Okay. And because the world is overwhelming and they notice that people are paying attention to them and stuff like that, they also become centration or egocentric. So the world is about them. In fact, when we're the most egocentric is around between the age of 2 and 7, but it's also going to reappear in adolescence where we think that the world is all about us and we're the ones that the world exists for us and because of us. Okay. So those are some aspects of the pre-operational phase. All right. So the next phase, what are some things that need to happen for us then to evolve into a different phase of cognitive development? And this is best explained by two tests that we can do. One is a conservation task, and one is what we call the three mountain task. So let's rehearse these really quick. So what is the conservation task? So what Piaget starts out with is two beakers that are the same size and have the same amount of liquid. Okay. And then he takes one of the beakers, let's say B, and puts it into a different size. Maybe it's shorter and fatter or taller and more slender. And he pours it into this now different sized beaker. And then he asks the child, well, originally he asked the child, A, B, are they the same? And of course, most children will say yes. And then he will ask, is A and C the same amount, or has it changed? And what he found is children around the age of 6 or 7 and under will incorrectly say, no, there's more or less now. So maybe they'd say, because it was risen up here, they say, no, there's more in C now, or the like. And then around the age of 6 and 7 and above, the child correctly states that it's still the same amount. You just poured it in a different sized beaker. And so this is the idea of conservation, that just because a mass changes shape doesn't mean it changes in size. Okay. And so it's that understanding the flexibility of the world. Okay. The next task is what known as the three mountain task, or I like using the tree example instead. So, Piaget would have this center mountain right here. And then I'm going to call these trees because it helps differentiate this. Then on one side, there's this bigger, lighter green tree. And on the other side, there's a more slender, dark green tree that's a little shorter. And what we have is we have Piaget on this side and we have the child on this side. And Piaget asks the child, what does the child see? And they usually go, well, I see this bigger light green tree. I see a mountain. And then there's a smaller, darker green tree on the other side, on the right side. Okay. And then the real test is Piaget asks and says, what do I see? What does Piaget see? And again, what Piaget found is the child under the age of about 6 or 7 will incorrectly say, while you see a big tree, like a green tree, a mountain, and a smaller, darker green tree. Okay. But sometime around the 6 to 7 and above, the child will correctly say, what you see is I'm going to remember how this is looking. Okay, on the left side, you see on your left, you see this small dark green tree, and then you see the mountain, and then on your right side, you see the lighter green, bigger tree. Okay. Now, is required to do this task for the child. What's required is for that child to take the table in their mind and mentally rotate it and mentally manipulate it until they see the view of another person. Okay. So this means that the child is now mentally manipulating and mentally um, um, working with objects in their mind. They're able to mentally work with them. Okay. Now, manipulation is not necessarily a bad word. It just means that they can change it. And so this is the example of, the child around this age. If they break their car, they can try and figure out how to put it back together, and they realize that things are reversible. Okay. But let's go up to here and let's talk now about the concrete phase of development. So the concrete stage of development is, and the reason why it's called concrete is children are taking the massive numbers of symbols that they have and they're putting them into categories to make them easier to deal with. And usually these categories are of some hierarchical level, from best to worst or something like that. Okay. But really the reason why it's concrete is that it's because these children are kind of thinking black and white. There's black, there's white, there's good guys, there's bad guys, there's cops, there's robbers, and the like. They don't see, for example, when we get into the formal operational phase, they can't see, for example, cops serve the community, but they can also enter into bad behavior. People in prison may have done something wrong, but that doesn't mean they don't have positive qualities. So in the formal operations phase, we'll get into, we realize that the world isn't black and white, it's shades of gray. I always liken this to when I worked with women in the prison. Yes, I met women in there that were in there for very awful reasons, but they also had positive qualities. I knew a female a female murderer who was really good with accounting. And I knew, many women in there that were there for various reasons. During child visitations, they were wonderful mothers. Okay, they just had this other part of their life that they made mistakes in. So everything is within gray areas. And that's what we start to, and that can differentiate the difference between concrete and formal operations. And in formal operations, which Piaget believed happens around the age of 11, and usually this is tested through some paper and pencil types test. This is where we use logic and systematic thinking. Okay, so this is Piaget's cognitive models, and so let's give this a critique, and we're going to critique it mainly from a cultural perspective. I want to point out that one level of development isn't necessarily more or less than another area of development. Okay. The thing that we have learned when we do cross-cultural comparisons using Piaget's theory is that the place you get to, the stage you get to, are based on the demands the environment puts on you. Okay, so let's start with some quote unquote first world country. Let's compare the United States with Germany. Okay, I think it is about 85% of Americans end up in stage 3 development. Only 15% go on to stage 4 or remain in stage 1 and stage 2. So this is the US. In Germany, about 90% make it to make it or end up in the stage 4 of development. And you got to ask, so what is the difference between the United States and Germany? Well, if you think about the United States, we're a very, I don't want to use this term, but we're a very black and white country. We're a country of laws. Either you break a law or you obey a law. Either you make money or you don't make money, and we don't differentiate, these types of things. Everything for us is black and white. And if we go back to the roots of prejudice in the United States, we put people in very solid categories based on the color of their skin, and we don't differentiate people on those grounds. I'm hoping we're getting better at that, but that's been kind of our history. If you look at Germany, on the other hand, is they don't have black and white answers for everything. Everything is more of a philosophical debate. Now we got to take out a time period in German history, that little World War II and that little World War One they got us into. But when we look at, much of the uh, information that comes out in physics, that come out of even early psychology and biology, it usually came out of German universities. And if you wanted a good education, especially like in the 19th century or even right now, Germany is a good bet to get a high quality education. So there's that. They use much more of a gray abstract thinking. Okay. Now let's compare the United States and Germany together with people living in the Amazon. Okay. People we've tested in the Amazon usually make it to about stage 2, or symbolic representation. One thing we do need to take out of this for these individuals is this part, because they're very not egocentric, but they tend to symbolically represent everything. And if you want to think of, well, why is that? What is the demands of the environment for these individuals? Well, these individuals need to know, in this very diverse place, which plants to eat and not eat. They need to remember the trail to get from a hunting spot back to the village. They have to know the different types of symbolize the different types of animals, even if those animals might look similar. And so they have to be able to symbolize their world. They don't have much need for mentalization or for those things. And if you want to think about it, so this makes these individuals very successful in this environment. Because if we took some of these guys into the Amazon, they would need to take a boat, they would need tents, navigation gear, they need to bring their own food, they would need to have all of these gadgets and everything to explore the Amazonian jungle. In fact, usually they will have a guide that is Amazonian along with their maps and their GPSs and their, all their survival gear, their mosquito nets and all those kinds of things. These guys, okay, for the most part, couldn't survive in this environment. Okay. And so I just wanted to mention this. This has been some of the criticisms about Piaget's theory. And then the other criticism is as I mentioned earlier, we have found that infants have much more of a complex world than we give them credit for. Object permanence, we are finding, occurs around 6 months of age. As I mentioned in the beginning of class, the majority of infants actually do statistics can do statistical probability a little bit better than most statisticians could even. They're good at math, and they have a their judgment of probably one of the most interesting researches that I've read on infancy is that even at about 6 weeks of age, an infant can tell the difference between a good person and a bad person. So, for example, in this research, we look for, withdraw behaviors, or we look for approaching behaviors, or how long they stare, or how long they try to grasp, and those things tell whether the infant is liking or disliking what they see. And in one research, they took a series of pictures. So they took pictures of Charles Manson, Hitler, and some of the, those really bad dudes. And then they had pictures of good individuals such as MLK, Mother Teresa, and those individuals, kind of very well different individuals that are very far on the human scale of good and bad, if you want to put it that way. And just at 6 weeks of age, infants will do an approach behavior towards MLK, but they will try and get away from, and most of the time even cry to pictures of Charles Manson. So even at early infancy, we have this idea of being able to tell people who are good for us versus people who are bad for us. So one of the things, one of the biggest criticisms of Piaget's theory is there needs to be a lot of updating in the stage 1 of development. Okay. All right, I think I talked a lot